The sun was a hammer on the anvil of the high plains, beating down on the dust and sweat of the annual stock auction. For Jedediah Stone, it was just noise. The auctioneer's rhythmic chant, the lowing of cattle, the coarse laughter of men making deals, it was all a foreign language he no longer wished to understand. He stood apart from the crowd, a solitary figure carved from granite and regret, his hat pulled low to shadow eyes that had seen too much. His ranch, a quiet kingdom of solitude, was waiting for him. He had done his duty, shown his face, and now the silence was calling him home. He turned to leave, his boots scuffing the dirt, ready to put the world of men behind him once more. That's when he saw her. She was not part of the auction, but being guided through the throng by two men whose faces were as hard and unforgiving as the landscape. She was young, her jaw set with a defiance that seemed too big for her slender frame. But it wasn't her face that stopped Jedediah cold, that rooted him to the spot as if struck by lightning. It was her hand. On the back of it, stark against her skin, was a tattoo. A raven, its wings unfurled in mid-flight. A precise, stylized design he knew as well as the lines on his own weathered palm. The world, which had been a dull roar, fell into absolute silence. Because that mark, that specific raven, was a promise made in firelight and blood between two brothers. A mark that only two people on earth should ever have. And one of them, his brother Caleb, was 10 years in the ground. What would you do, in that moment? When a ghost from a life you buried long ago appears on the hand of a stranger, a harbinger of a trouble you thought was over. The sight of the raven shattered the peace Jedediah had spent a decade building. The walls of his solitude, so carefully constructed, crumbled to dust in a single heartbeat. The urge to turn, to ride back to his ranch and pretend he'd seen nothing, was a physical ache. It was the voice of self-preservation, the coward's whisper that had kept him safe and numb for so long. But the image of the tattoo was burned into his mind, a brand of hot iron on his conscience. It wasn't a choice anymore. It was a summons. He pulled his hat down tighter and began to move, melting into the dispersing crowd, a predator reawakening after a long slumber. He followed the girl and her grim-faced escorts as they left the town, their horses kicking up dust that glittered like gold in the failing light. Every step was a battle. His mind screamed at him to go back, to let the past lie buried. But his body, guided by an instinct he thought he'd lost, moved with a purpose that felt both foreign and frighteningly familiar. The skills he had tried so hard to forget, how to walk without sound, how to read the landscape for signs, how to anticipate the movements of dangerous men, surfaced from the depths of his memory. He wasn't playing the hero. Heroes were for storybooks. He was simply a man shackled by a promise, a debt owed to a ghost. And the bill, it seemed, had finally come due. Is a promise made to the dead still binding on the living? Is it an honor to keep it, or a fool's errand to chase a shadow into the dark? Tell me what you think in the comments. As the twilight deepened, painting the mesas in shades of purple and blood orange, the past was no longer a ghost but a living presence riding alongside him. The memory he had walled off for years broke free, flooding him with the warmth of a campfire and the sting of regret. He was younger then, the world still a place of possibility. His brother, Caleb, all fire and idealism, was leaning forward, a needle and ink in his hand. He was etching the raven onto Jedediah's skin, a mirror image of his own. It's a promise, Jed, Caleb had said, his voice earnest, full of the conviction that Jedediah had lost. Two ravens. Hugin and Munin. Thought and memory. They fly for Odin, see the world, and report back. For us, it means if one falls, the other flies for him. No matter what. No debts left unpaid. No one left behind. Jedediah had scoffed at the time, calling it foolish romance. But he'd let his brother finish. Days later, Caleb rode out to confront Silas Vance, a land baron with a reputation as cold and dark as a winter grave, who was squeezing local homesteaders dry. Caleb went to talk, to reason. Jedediah had argued against it, calling it someone else's trouble. He stayed behind. It was the last time he saw his brother alive. That choice, to stay, to protect his own peace over his brother's back, had been the architect of his 10-year exile. Now, seeing that mark on the girl, he understood. The debt was never paid. The story wasn't over. The past wasn't dead, it wasn't even past. Have you ever made a choice, a single decision, that you have regretted every single day since? If you have, then you know the crushing weight Jedediah Stone carried with him into that night. He tracked them to a dilapidated way station, a festering sore on the edge of the Badlands. From a ridge overlooking the ramshackle buildings, he watched. The two men moved with a chilling professionalism, their vigilance a constant, tangible thing. The girl, Ilara, was not cowed. He saw her watch them, her eyes missing nothing, her posture radiating a defiant stillness. She was looking for a weapon, an opening, a chance. She was a survivor, not a victim. A direct approach was a fool's death. These were not common thugs. So Jedediah chose a different path. He circled around, downwind, a shadow moving through other shadows. He found their horses, tied loosely to a rail. With a soft murmur and a quick, sharp slash of his knife against a leather saddlebag, he sent the animals into a panicked frenzy. They bucked and screamed, tearing free and scattering into the darkness. In the ensuing confusion, as the two men swore and scrambled to recover their mounts, Jedediah moved. He isolated one of them, the one who had strayed furthest, luring him away from the dim lantern light with the sound of a snapped twig. The confrontation was not a cinematic duel. It was a swift, brutal, and silent reality. A collision of desperate purpose and cold duty. It was over in seconds. The man lay still in the dust. Leaning close, Jedediah found a pouch. Inside, a letter. And a name. Silas Vance. They were taking her to a place called the Quarry, Vance's impenetrable fortress. The first move was made. The first blood was shed. Was it the right choice? To resort to such cold violence just to gain a piece of a puzzle? Comment with a 1 if you believe his actions were justified, or a 2 if there was another way. In the heart of the chaos, Jedediah found his way to her. She was standing near the doorway of the main building, a length of rusted pipe held tight in her hand. She did not startle when he emerged from the darkness. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, were fixed on him. "I saw you at the auction," she said, her voice low and steady. It was not an accusation, but a statement of fact. "You wear the raven." She nodded toward his hand, which he had unconsciously clenched into a fist. He didn't have to ask how she knew. The answer was right there, on her own skin. "He said you would come," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "He told me if anything ever happened to him, a man with a matching mark, a man bound by a promise, would find me." Jedediah's world tilted on its axis. "He?" The girl's expression softened for a fraction of a second. "My father." Caleb Stone. The word struck him harder than any physical blow. Caleb had a daughter. A life Jedediah never knew existed. She explained that Silas Vance had murdered her father, not in a fair fight, but in ambush. Before he died, Caleb had given her the tattoo, a legacy and a key. This wasn't a random kidnapping. It was the final, loose end of Caleb's war. And Silas Vance wanted it tied. Suddenly, the mission was transformed. The abstract weight of a decade-old promise became the undeniable gravity of blood. He was not rescuing a stranger. He was fighting for his family. For the part of his brother that had survived. And Ilara, she was not a passenger on his journey. She knew the way into the quarry. And she knew where Silas Vance kept the one thing that could destroy him, her younger brother, Finn. How does everything change when a mission of honor becomes a mission for family? The journey to the quarry was a pilgrimage through a dead land. They rode under the cold, indifferent light of the stars, two ghosts haunting a territory that bore the scars of Silas Vance's ambition. The earth itself seemed wounded, the streams thin and choked, the trees skeletal and grey. This was his kingdom, built on the bones of men like Caleb. They spoke little, Jedediah and the girl who was his niece. Words were an unnecessary currency. Their bond was forged in the silence, in the shared rhythm of their horses' hooves, in the singular, burning purpose that guided them forward. In her, Jedediah saw the reflection of his brother, the same fierce intelligence in her eyes, the same stubborn set of her jaw, the same unyielding fire that refused to be extinguished. She was Caleb's daughter in spirit as much as in blood. She did not defer to him. She questioned him. Her inquiries were sharp, precise barbs that pierced the armor of his long isolation. Why did you wait so long? Where were you when he needed you? What kind of man lets grief become a fortress? She was not trying to wound him, she was trying to awaken him. With every mile they traveled, she was stripping away the layers of rust and regret that had accumulated over 10 years. She was reminding him not of the man he had become, but of the man he once was, the man Caleb had believed in. He was not just leading her to a fortress of stone, she was leading him back to himself. Is it ever too late? Is there a point of no return for a person's soul, or can we always, even in the deepest shadow, become the person we were meant to be? They arrived on a moonless night, looking down from a high cliff at their destination. The quarry was not a fortress, it was a scar, a wound carved into the face of a mountain. Lights glittered like malevolent eyes in the darkness, and the silhouettes of armed guards patrolled the ramparts. It was a monument to paranoia and power, seemingly impenetrable. A frontal assault would be a massacre. But Caleb, ever the thinker, had planned for this. Ilara pointed towards the base of the mountain, to a place shrouded in shadow and overgrown brush. The tattoo, she said softly, tracing the raven on her hand. It's not just a symbol. It's a map, she explained Caleb's last desperate plan. Before Silas Vance owned the mountain, it was mined by another company. They had built an aqueduct, a waterway to clear the mines, running directly beneath the main complex. It was abandoned, forgotten by all but the few who knew the mountain's history. It was their secret door into the heart of the beast. To enter it was to commit completely. There would be no retreat. Down in that suffocating darkness, they would either find her brother and the justice they sought, or they would be consumed, their story ending in a forgotten tunnel beneath their enemies' feet. Jedediah looked at the raven on his own hand, the ink faded but the promise clear as ever. He then looked at hers, a perfect, dark echo. The promise was about to be paid in full. If you knew a path led to almost certain death, but it was the only path to redemption, would you have the courage to take that first step into the dark? The air in the aqueduct was cold and dead, thick with the smell of stagnant water and a century of decay. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of water echoing in the oppressive blackness, a sound that drilled into the skull. They moved by touch, one hand on the damp, moss-covered wall, the other holding a small, precious lantern. It felt like a descent into the grave. After what felt like an eternity, they found the exit Caleb had marked on his design, a rusty grate leading up into a storeroom. They emerged like ghosts from the underworld into the belly of the beast. The quarry was a labyrinth of cold stone and colder silence, patrolled by men who moved with the quiet efficiency of wolves. Guided by Ilara's memory of her father's warnings, they navigated the corridors. They found what she called Silas Vance's trophy room. It was a museum of cruelty. There were no statues or paintings. Instead, shelves were lined with deeds to land acquired through blackmail and blood. Display cases held personal mementos, a locket, a child's toy, a faded photograph, stolen from the families he had destroyed. And there, on a pedestal in the center of the room, was Caleb's gun belt, his journal laid open beside it. Silas didn't just defeat his enemies, he erased them, collecting their stories as his ultimate prize. And in that room, they found him. Young Finn. He wasn't in a cell. He was dressed in fine clothes, serving as a personal page to Silas, a living trophy to remind everyone of the fate of those who defied him. The sight of the boy, his eyes hollow, serving the man who had murdered his father, ignited a rage in Jedediah so cold and pure it burned away every last trace of fear. What is true evil? Is it the quick, hot violence of a bullet? Or is it the slow, cold power to steal a person's history, their memory, their very story? Their presence did not go unnoticed for long. As Jedediah reached for the boy, the heavy doors of the trophy room slammed shut. A trap. From the shadows at the far end of the room, Silas Vance emerged. He was not what Jedediah expected. He was not a brute. He was tall, dressed impeccably, with a charismatic smile that did not reach his eyes. Those eyes were like chips of ice. He was flanked by two of his most hardened guards, but he moved as if he were utterly alone, the apex predator in his domain. The second raven, Silas said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. "I confess, I was beginning to wonder if you existed," he explained, with a chilling lack of emotion, that he had known about Ilara's escape all along. He had allowed it, banking on the foolishness of a family promise to lure the final piece of his collection out of hiding. He wanted both raven tattoos, a matched set. He spoke of Caleb with the detached air of a connoisseur discussing a flawed antique. He had spirit, Silas mused, but he was burdened. By hope. By honor. He gestured around the room. Honor is the most useless trophy of all. It is a comforting story the weak tell themselves before they are erased, and then, the room erupted. It was not a noble duel. It was a desperate, primal explosion of violence. Jedediah fought with the fury of a man unchained, a decade of repressed grief and guilt fueling every blow. This was not a fight for land or money. It was for Caleb's memory. For Ilara's future. For Finn's soul. For the promise etched in fire and ink so long ago. When all hope is gone, when you finally stand before the monster who has taken everything from you, where do you find the strength for one last, desperate fight? The fight was a blur of brutal, close-quarters desperation. But Silas Vance had made a fatal miscalculation. He believed honor was a weakness. He did not understand that for a man like Jedediah, a man with nothing left to lose, honor was the only weapon that could not be broken. When the dust settled, Silas lay defeated, his collection of stolen histories finally at an end. His power, built on fear, evaporated the moment he fell. His men, leaderless and broken, fled into the night. As the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, Jedediah, Ilara, and Finn walked out of the dark fortress and into the clean morning air. The sun felt like a benediction, washing away the grime of the quarry and the shadows of the past. Jedediah looked down at the raven on his hand, the ink a faded black against his scarred skin. The promise was fulfilled. The debt was paid. The weight that had stooped his shoulders for 10 years was gone, replaced by the light pressure of Finn's small hand in his. He was no longer Jedediah Stone, the hermit haunted by ghosts. He was an uncle. A protector. A beginning. They rode away from the quarry, not back towards the lonely silence of Jedediah's ranch, but towards a new horizon, a shared future. You see, this story is not just about a rancher in the Old West. It is about the promises that define us. We all have them. They are the debts we owe not of money, but of love, of loyalty, of care. They are the silent vows we make to the people who matter most. Your life is full of these promises, these ravens waiting to take flight. They are your duty to a friend in need, your responsibility to your family, your commitment to being the person you know you should be. Do not let regret build walls around your heart. Do not let fear convince you to stay behind when someone you love rides out to face the world. Look at your own hands. Think about the promises they have made. Let those promises be your map, your courage, and your honor. Let them guide you out of the shadows and into the light.